Hello, everyone, and welcome back to your Daily Detroit. It is Monday, August 26th, 2024. I am Jer Stays here sharing what to know and where to go around Metro Detroit. And as it is election season, every week we are doing this with none other than the excellent, indefatigable, and brilliant Steve Freese. How are you, sir?
I'm great, but I'm very defatigable. Yeah. I get tired very easily these days.
Is indefatigable one of those words that came out of Latin and we lost the root word? You know, like combobulated and discombobulated. Like nobody says combobulated, right? Discombobulated is a word that came out of another like language. Is that one of those things?
Probably. I don't know.
Well, you know who is discombobulated? It's RFK Jr. As to the chagrin of a listener that we answered their question last week, RFK Jr. has dropped out. What do we think about this, and how do we think that it's going to impact Michigan? Because he did get some traction here for a while.
So he is on the ballot in Michigan, or he is able to remove himself from the ballot in Michigan at this point? Do you know?
I think he chose to stay on. Like he's suspending his campaign.
But he stays on the ballot.
Right, because in certain states he pulled himself off. Other ones he didn't, because he went ahead and endorsed Donald Trump, and he wants to do what he can to try to get Donald Trump elected, which I got to say to my friends on the left who thought that RFK was like the answer. I mean, really, come on now.
You know, it is kind of amazing to me how thrilled the MAGA folks are by this endorsement. I would be embarrassed. I mean, they're already dealing with the fact that the Democrats have painted them as weird. I mean, the only thing weirder in this entire campaign has been RFK Jr. The brainworm, the bear cub, but leaving it in the trunk. He's bizarre. And now there's a story out today. One of his relatives is talking about how he like decapitated a whale with a chainsaw. I mean,
what?
I don't know. I just saw that headline a little while ago.
Okay, so is RFK's life just one giant Mad Lib? You know, you take all the phrases.
I mean, you know, RFK Jr.'s daughter recalls him using chainsaw to behead whale in resurfaced interview. There you go. I'm making it up. He's so weird, and he's so obviously not well. The thing is that RFK Jr., you know, his family is upset because he got the name, and so he's screwing up and, or according to his sister, setting their father's memory on fire. But he's also like just deleting his own legacy. I mean, legacy, whatever. I actually interviewed him about 5 or 6 years ago. He was considered a very serious environmentalist. I mean, yeah, he had the whole anti-vax thing, and that was troubling. But he also was a lawyer, and he very involved with I can't remember the name of it right now, but it's a big national like water quality group that I did an interview with him because I was working on a piece about one of the affiliates down in Alabama, actually. He was a very serious environmentalist. So it makes absolutely no sense that he's, you know, thrown in with the guy whose Supreme Court is saying, pollute all you want, we'll make more. He's not right. he's a very bitter person. The answer to the question about what it means for the state or the country, I just don't know. There is a piece of his voter that is probably going to go to Trump because, you know, by now the people he shed when he was a little higher in the polls, the folks that left him were the people who went to Kamala Harris when Biden dropped out. I mean, those are the people who are like, oh, okay, now I have a Democrat I can vote for. They left this nut job at that point. It probably is good for Trump. For Michigan, I really don't think it's going to be that close. I think that
really?
Yeah, I don't think that the suburban women are coming back to Trump, even if J.D. Vance is running around pretending that suddenly he's not as anti-abortion as we know He is. I
So
mean,
if people don't know, the news hit came out. He was in an interview, I believe it was with Meet the Press, and he said that Trump would veto a national abortion ban. And in my head, I have to just say BS, because we looked at what happened with the Supreme Court interviews, and they were like, oh, it's settled law, da, 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 da. And then all of a sudden they did it. So I have no reason to believe that this is going to be the case. Like, I feel like if you believe them on this issue particularly, I have some vacation property in a swamp to sell you.
look, I don't even know that a national abortion ban could make it through Congress, even if there's a 1 or 2 vote majority in the Senate for the Republicans. I just don't think that it would actually come to this. So it is a theoretical idea, but it is absurd. If they manage to make it happen, there's no way that Trump is not going to sign it because he doesn't care. And also, why are we even talking about this? Everything he says is a lie. It's so transparently obvious that the whole sort of modus operandi of this campaign is say whatever they have to say. Whatever it is they got to say it. And it doesn't even matter if there's a ton of evidence to the contrary. I mean, you could probably say that about Kamala Harris too. She's certainly changed some positions, but it's just not the same. I can't quite put my finger on it, but it's sort of like her flip-flopping. It's within the margin of normal in politics, whereas theirs is just off the wall.
Yeah, I mean, you even saw social media reactions to what he said, and they were like, oh no, there's 2 evil parties. And I was like, they're not going to give up that base. They came to the dance with that group of people, and it would be political suicide to make a switch at this point. And I bet you behind the scenes, they're like, look, we got to do what we got to do to get elected, but we'll honor the promise once we get there, or something like that. Like, I just don't believe anything.
We have seen this time and time again. The great irony of Trump supporters is that there is nobody who takes his word less seriously than Trump supporters. It's the weirdest thing. They don't believe what he says even more than the rest of us. And what I mean is, he gets up and says something crazy about something he wants to do that's extreme, and they just sit there and say, well, he doesn't really mean that. And they're always saying that. They're always saying, oh, he doesn't mean that. He doesn't mean that. Like, the Trump supporter does not believe what Trump says. They just believe that he's saying it because he has to, but that he believes whatever it is they believe. And it's the other side. It's the Democrats and the anti-Trump people who believe him when he says he's going to be a dictator on day one, when he says that he wants to terminate the Constitution, that when he says you might not ever have to vote again after this election, or whatever else there is. They believe him. And his own supporters just shrug it off. It's a weird, weird psychology. I can't quite put my finger on why they've come to that, but they do.
You know what else is a little weird to me? This U.S. Senate race, now that we're settled into the general election, the general challengers between Mike Rogers and Elissa Slotkin, this is a race where nobody seems to, with their local stuff, want to talk about their parties. And like, I get it. Like, people are tired of the parties, and independents especially. Like, I feel like this Senate race is going to be the battle over who could care less. You know, the low information voter or the extreme middle voter. It's like, oh, if I can not be necessarily a Democrat or one of the Democrats, I mean, we know who they are, but it seems like that messaging is just kind of like vanished away as we've gotten to the general.
It is really interesting. I mean, you see Elissa Slotkin signs around and there is no party reference. I received a Mike Rogers mailer yesterday or the day before, and it says nothing about him being a Republican. It leads with the idea that he takes on both parties. And here's the thing that I find so interesting about this. That is not usually how this goes. Usually there's one or the other candidate who tries to wash away their party affiliation and make it seem like, they're almost their own, I mean, when I was in Nevada, Harry Reid, of all people, used to run for re-election to the Senate. And I mean, he was a Democratic leader. And yet, for some reason, he was always running on these slogans like independent, like Nevada. I mean, he was running the Democratic playbook, but he was still somehow an independent, right? But the Republicans in Nevada didn't do that. Here we have in Michigan, we have both party candidates trying to separate themselves in some way from their own party. I can see why Mike Rogers is doing it. I'm a little confused as to why Elissa Slotkin is doing it. I don't really understand, why Elissa Slotkin thinks that being known as a Democrat is somehow toxic in this state. All of the statewide elected officials are Democrats.
It'll also be interesting to see how this deploys out over the next, month or so, and how polling sits in this. And if one person really, as we get into the general side, beyond, the theoretical polls, like once we get into the meat of this, how these two candidates settle head to head. And I'm also curious how much Elissa is going to really ride the coattails of whatever happens in Detroit. And I do believe that Vice President Kamala Harris is going to drive some turnout in Detroit, and that'll benefit her. But it'll be interesting to see like how much time she spends down here, not just in the city, but also in those, southern Oakland County suburbs where there's tons of voters, tons of people, and tons of money.
I was listening to Gretchen Whitmer on Pod Save America last week, and she was talking about how her reelection was driven in a lot of ways by college campus voting, just different groups that she worked really hard and got out there talking to people and so on. And so it will be very interesting to see as the Democrats take her playbook and start showing up on the campus of Michigan, MSU, Central Michigan, Kalamazoo College, whatever it might be, and using that entry point, because there are a lot of young people who are very excited about this campaign and want to get involved. And it'll be interesting to see sort of if they go that route. We're sort of separating ourselves out a little bit from the Senate race, but that's the other question. Will Elissa Slotkin be showing up when Kamala Harris shows up? I mean, I don't think that Mike Rogers was at the very well thought out appearance of Trump in Howell, Michigan the other day.
There's going to be an investigation around the idea if local resources were used for this campaign stop, because it is very strange and interesting that they did a campaign stop at an official government county place. That isn't really normal. You're not really supposed to do that, I don't think.
That's a tricky thing, isn't it? Because, I mean, candidates show up at schools all the time.
Yeah.
They speak in school gyms on, whatever it is. I mean, I don't really know. Yeah, okay, you could probably pursue and probably go nowhere because a lot of other things to worry about in this country. I mean, there was also a sheriff from Flint that spoke at the Democratic convention. I guess that's a little different because it's him on his own time and he's an elected official, but he did show up in his uniform.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned the convention and you mentioned Governor Gretchen Whitmer, and there were some Michigan moments that were interesting to me. Why don't we go through those a little bit? I've got one I know I want to talk about, but there's two or three you wanted to mention.
We had Dana Nessel, who made it to the top of Mediaite with her paraphrasing of a very famous Charlton Heston NRA quote, which was something about, you'll get my guns when you pry them out of my cold, dead hands. And she got up there and said something about, you'll get my wedding ring or my marriage license out of my cold, dead hands or something like that. Whatever it was very hardcore, trying to stand up for gay marriage. And then there was the very, very, very poor and weird presentation by Gretchen Whitmer herself. I did not understand her sort of weird affectation, her weird delivery, and just the writing wasn't very good. It was a badly written speech that she delivered very badly.
And it's so weird because she did great on Pod Save America. This feels like a one-off where it's like the frequency didn't match. What's the frequency, Kenneth? I'm willing to be just like, that was just, everyone's got their off nights. And that to me was it. I mean, I saw some people who seemed to like it. I also saw a lot of people who liked Vice President Kamala Harris's speech. I thought it was serviceable as an introduction, all that. It didn't really stir me, but I don't know if that speech was for me. You know what I mean? Like, that speech was an introductory speech for the country, and some polls showed that it really affected well with people who are on the fence and things like that. So maybe that's exactly who it was for, and maybe that speech wasn't for me, and maybe the Whitmer thing wasn't for me either. But like, I saw people react positively, but I don't know how much of that is critical versus how much of it's fandom.
I've had a lot of thoughts about the Kamala speech because I fell asleep in the middle of it. I read it on my phone the next morning because I wanted to see what I had missed, and I didn't really feel compelled to go and see the rest of the performance part of it. But I guess I felt like it was fine. I felt like it was, like you said, serviceable, adequate. I certainly think that she avoided creating any kind of controversy for herself, which is difficult because, you know, every time she starts talking about some sort of policy, it becomes controversial. The discussion she had about price controls the week before, it actually generated some debate about her, which is not really what she's after right now. But mostly, I think that the idea here is that it was successful in letting people imagine her as a president.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And that's fine. If that was all it was, that's fine.
Yeah, I think it did the job. It just, you know, I feel bad. And I went back and I rewatched the performance part of it. And I think it was the kind of speech where it's like, okay, you don't really know who she is. And we just have to keep reminding ourselves, too, that most of the country, yeah, they know she was vice president, but they don't really know who she is. So there's still a lot of that work that needs to be done. And there's like, you know, this is a pretty strong vibes campaign. You know, for me with the convention, I, of course, I think it was night one, enjoyed State Senator Mallory McMurrow's speech around Project 2025, because she always does things creatively. And I really think she's a rising star in a lot of ways. And full disclosure, she's been on the show before and is one of those people who's like, hey, if somebody wants to talk to her, she always makes herself available. So kudos to that. But, you know, I thought it was, you know, kind of fun, but also interesting to see how Project 2025 has been tied to Donald Trump. And then there's so many supporters and him trying to run so hard from it. It's so weird. It's like almost like this, like, kid where it's like, oh, Project 2025 is it, and it's trying to tag you.
Well, it's the same thing I was saying earlier. Here's a playbook, as Tim Walz called it, that was created essentially under the assignment of Donald Trump, who told the Heritage Foundation to get whatever you need ready for when I get power again. And then so many of the writers of this thing were Trump people. There's so much extreme stuff in there. So you have all the Trump voters saying, well, he says he's not associated with that. Or, you know, he won't do any of that. He says very clearly what he plans to do. And his own voters are the ones who sit around and say, he doesn't mean that.
Yeah. One thing that it got to me on a very guttural level, on a very personal level, I just thought was just kind of gross. A number of pundits went after Tim Walz's son, Gus, who has a nonverbal learning disability. And this has a whole variety of ways that this can present, you know, and there's so many stereotypes around this stuff. And there was this whole thing about raising a son who's weak and this other stuff. And I'm like, who raised you to talk about people's children like that? Especially like younger children. I was like, do you know that Republicans have kids too? Like, it's really strange to me. It was strange. It was off-putting. And I know that like a lot of regular voters don't pay that much attention to the whole media cycle and everything else. So it might have gotten skipped, because it seems like a lot of political pundits try to do some trial balloons and see what sticks. And they just like say a bunch of uninformed crap. And then they wonder what goes popular on social media. And then they double down on it for their grift. This one, I was just like, wow, you're not a human on this one. I really bugged me. I know you have some feelings on it. I just wanted to share it because I don't want to contribute to the noise on it, but it just is like just such bad character to me.
I have a different opinion about it. You know, I have a son who's almost 5 and he's on the autism spectrum, and we're getting what we need for him. And I actually thought it was thrilling just personally thrilling. And this is not a political comment. This is a personal comment that somebody at that level has a child like mine, period. So it was incredibly encouraging and inspirational in that respect. The idea that somebody like that could end up being in the White House, making policy for families like mine, is just very exciting. And the process of some stupid people saying the worst stuff, saying that Gus Walls is weird, or there's this other thread of people who are attacking Tim Walz because when they were lining up on the stage, he seemed to jerk his son's arm a little hard to get him where he needed to be for this photo op thing that they do. And there's all this like conversation about what a cruel and violent father he must be. And there's this other thing about, well, maybe he was doing it because he was trying to avoid his son walking into the teleprompter, which seemed to be possibly imminent. But all of the bad behavior, all of the horrible, stupid, insensitive things that people have said has only prompted this huge swarm and uprising of decent people saying, that's disgusting, you're a terrible person, whatever it might be. Yes, it is upsetting to see somebody or a family like that being mocked, but there is an upside to it. And the upside to it is that millions of people are learning something about a family or people that are different than them. And in the meantime, people like me are finding out all kinds of famous people who are living the life I live. Tina Brown, the famous magazine editor, wrote an op-ed in the New York Times about her 38-year-old, I think nonverbal autistic son who still lives with her. Rosie O'Donnell has an 11-year-old autistic child. I wouldn't have known that this many people understood what this is like. I wouldn't have known that this many people may not understand, but want to, and want to be sensitive to it, and want to be kind about it. So, on balance, it turned out pretty well.
I'm just going to leave it there because I think that's a great place to stop things. I did get a listener question for us on Saturday. Christine, I got your question, but here's the thing. Need to do a little bit of research. If you've got a question for us, dailydetroit@gmail.com. Anything Michigan-wide, statewide, locally, nationally, we'd love to hear from you. And Steve Freese, I appreciate you every week. I'm really enjoying our conversations.
It's been a lot of fun. I've enjoyed being a podcaster again on a regular basis. It's been more fun than I thought it would be.
Well, with that, I'm Jer Stays. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you to our members on Patreon, patreon.com/dailydetroit. Local media requires local support to survive, and I am ever grateful for you. Remember that you are somebody. We'll see you around Detroit. Talk tomorrow.